Hey guys, this one's going to be a little bit different because recently a video came out by Grade A Under A that is about antidepressants that I found to be, I hate to use this word, problematic. Me, Wobbles, and Lanooski sat down to have a conversation about it. But before we get into that, I just want to say that I am not a doctor and I'm also not an expert. I'm just somebody who's been in the mental health system for a long time as a patient, and I'm also a biologist by training. So I just did a bunch of research into the concerns that Grade had and came up with what I'm about to share in this podcast. But as always, please talk to your doctor about any concerns you have. That is the most important takeaway from this podcast. And in the description will be a link to my Google Doc that I put all my notes into, and also have links to all the bibliographies. So thank you for listening, and now let's get into it. So we just watched Me for the second time.
Me for the third time.
And Me for the first time. Although I've heard a lot about it up till this point.
Yeah, we read pretty hard about it. Well,
we were very upset. Grade made a video about antidepressants, and he talked about them in the umbrella term of antidepressants as like a whole.
He didn't really specify that there's more than just the one thing.
Yeah, he didn't give any specifics on what he took, and he said like,
or if he even took
2 seconds later, right? He didn't specify what that was. What was 2 seconds?
He didn't even say anything about talking to his doctor about it, or whether he was prescribed anything.
Yeah. So I have here a list of the different types of antidepressants and what they are. So I just want to read this real fast. So you have the SSRI, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which increases the level of serotonin in the brain. You have an SNRI, which is serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, which increase both in the brain.
For the SNRI, you just said both. What is both?
Norepinephrine and serotonin.
Okay.
So atypical antidepressants, I can't say like as a catch-all like what they do, because I would have to go through and say each drug name and what each drug does. So I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry. There's a lot of them, and I'm not going to do that.
If you're curious, talk to your doctor.
Right. There's tricyclic antidepressants, which is one of the oldest antidepressants that are out there. They were some of the original ones that were created. And they're a last resort due to a lot of health problems that come with taking those. And they help block serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake in the brain. So kind of like an SNRI. But SNRIs were created later on, so they're a more recent drug.
They were like an improvement on
the tricyclic antidepressant. And then last but not least is an MAOI, which is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And this is also a last resort because you need to change your diet to be on these. And what it does is monoamine oxidase is an enzyme in the brain that takes serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, and it's the enzyme that helps them get absorbed. And what it does is it blocks that enzyme to keep your brain with like a regular amount of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine in the brain rather than a decrease, which usually happens with depression. MAOIs are also used in schizophrenia and bipolar. And they're the ones that if you read like on the back of cold packets, like do not take if you're taking an MAOI. There's a lot of drug interactions. That's why they don't like you to take those, because
they're dangerous to mix with other medications.
Other things. Yeah, they can really fuck your day up. So I'm personally, what I think he's talking about are SSRIs.
Those are the most common to be prescribed for depression.
That's what I'm on. Is an SSRI.
Same. I am also on an SSRI.
So all three of us are all on an SSRI.
Yay!
Synchronicity, motherfucker.
So side effects of these drugs do exist.
Yeah.
We all know this.
And we're all on different types of SSRIs. There's a bunch of different types of each of these things.
It's not like there's one.
Yeah.
It's not like you can only take Prozac.
I, for one, am on Sertraline, which is also known as Zoloft, and that's mostly for anxiety and depression, or like, you know, either of the two, depending on like what kind of mixture is fucking with your brain.
Right.
And I've been on it.
Either or both.
Yeah, either or both. And I've been on it since roughly August or September of last year. And like I've adapted to the side effects, which it does have pretty fucking well, like mostly drowsiness. And in the first like few weeks of taking the introductory dose, I felt bloated. I kind of felt like a heartburny sensation in my core.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, to this day, I would say one of the bigger challenges is just like convincing myself to get out of bed, but not in like a existential sad way, which would define hard to get out of bed before taking the fucking medication. More of like, okay, let's go. Go get coffee. We're gonna do it. All right, this time for, oh fuck, it's 10. All right, I should go get coffee. And then I get coffee. That's really the most major difference as far as like maybe inconveniences since taking the drug, but you know, it's manageable. The only reason it might have been like hard in the last 2 weeks is fucking quarantine.
Yeah.
Like I don't have any like immediate things that I need to be able to do right now. But you know, like it's one of like the lower end things you could be taking, and I'm fortunate in that it was the first drug that I tried and it immediately worked in helping manage my anxiety. Because like, you know, we all have bad days. I still get fucking anxious.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not nearly as intense as it used to be, which I think is the important part. It's not a cure for your ailment. It's a tool that should be used for like, you know,
Helping to cope.
yeah, you cope with it and then you psychoanalyze yourself and be proactive about changing your life.
Medication comes in when you can't cope through other means.
Yeah.
So the medication is just a way to help you cope while you figure out how to do things. It's not like you take the medication and suddenly you're functional 100% as a normal human being.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't work like that.
No, and you are ideally supposed to do it in conjunction with psychotherapy of some kind. And one thing that, you know, a lot of people harp on is like, well, you either do it or you don't. And then if you don't, you either exercise or talk to someone, which, or, you know, getting exercise and having like a good diet, like that's objectively a good thing to do if you're having a rough time, because it'll...
It's good to do for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Like regardless of if you have like a mental illness or not, but if you do have one, like being compromised in any of those departments isn't gonna like increase your chances of getting better mentally. But you can do therapy in conjunction with the medication. And for me personally, I knew that I should probably try medication of some kind when I was on like month 6 or so of therapy, which helped immensely, mind you. But I was still like hitting some walls and just like just feeling like chemically incapable of handling some of my fits that I would have. Like I would get like crippling like episodes where I just wouldn't be able to be productive, or I wouldn't be able to talk to anybody, or I wouldn't be able to like go out and do anything. And there's only like so many things you can say verbally and have analyzed by somebody else before it's like, all right, well, something just might be up with my brain. And what better way to deal with that than something that's been proven to help deal with that on a chemical level?
Yeah.
So like, I don't know, like whenever I like, it's an uphill battle. Like all three of us could probably attest to just a lot of the social factors that might keep you from doing medication in the first place. And the reason we're talking about this video at all is because we legitimately think it would be a roadblock in people trying this option.
It's always been like, there's always been that weird stigma. It's been less recently.
Yeah.
But like, especially like people in our parents' generation, like you didn't talk about going to therapy. You didn't talk about like taking medication or anything. There was a huge social stigma against that sort of thing. So like, now it's becoming more acceptable, but there are still a lot of people who are hesitant to do it because of stigma.
One of the things I keep hearing about people who are scared to try meds is like, I don't want it to change who I am, or I don't want to,
I don't want to be a zombie.
Like, remember when H3H3 went on that rant about how he was afraid to try antidepressants and stuff too for his issues? And
like, that's a valid concern.
It's valid, and like the side effects are a valid concern, and I did a bunch of research into the two concerns, but grade specific concerns. Like, I did some research on sexual dysfunction and medication, as well as suicidal thoughts and medication, because like a lot of people are really worried about these things that supposedly come with meds. And one of the big things that I always tell everyone in my life, because I've been doing this for too fucking long.
Yes.
Like, I know you had a little blurb at the beginning saying that you're not an expert and no one should take your word as gospel, but out of all of us here, and I would even go as far to say out of anyone I personally know, you have like more than enough experience to at least say if like people should try this.
You may not have studied as a doctor, but you have so much experience with taking and trying medications that like you might as well fucking be one.
Yeah, so just to explain to anyone who's listening, I'm bipolar, type 2. There are 3 types.
Yeah.
People don't know that.
It's just bipolar.
It's just bipolar, point blank period, but that's not true. So I'm type 2, and which is one of the harder ones to diagnose and treat. And
it gets confused with, all 3 of them get confused with schizophrenia a lot.
And also unipolar depression.
Yeah.
Bipolar 2 gets confused with unipolar depression a lot. I've been through this rigmarole with medication and medication side effects because bipolar usually is treated with a cocktail of medicines. So I'm currently on an SSRI, a mood stabilizer, and an atypical antipsychotic, which all 3 brought together create a brain chemistry that works for me, that makes me able to function in society.
And be a person that is not terrible to be around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So like it sucks. What made me so angry about this video was, yes, side effects do exist, but he talks about the ones that are so rare or aren't necessarily rare, but like in specifics, the sexual dysfunction. Depression itself can cause sexual dysfunction in people just in general. Like if you're depressed, you don't necessarily want to be having sex.
It will lower your libido, definitely.
Right. So 40% of men and 50% of women have sexual dysfunction because of their depression, where any research that he would have done that low doses of SSRIs have a relatively low risk of sexual dysfunction, but the sexual side effects are more common than I thought. So thanks to Grade for making me do this research just in general, because that's interesting for me to find out that it is more common than I thought. But the reason people...
Well, how common is it?
I didn't quite get a number.
It probably depends on the medication itself.
But 50% of people don't discuss the sexual side effects with their doctor.
Which also makes it very hard to find a number.
All right, here's the underlying problem of anything that we're going to talk about, is that the conversation around mental health is so fucked by the stigma that we've already addressed that it's hard to even keep a bead on what medication does what to certain types of people. And the only way that's going to get like clarified is if there's less fear to try this shit out, and there's more like willingness to be open about stuff that might be a little taboo to talk about, even with your fucking doctor who's not going to tell your brother-in-law that you can't get it up.
Right. So the Harvard article that I read on sexual dysfunction was saying that clinicians should be advised to discuss sexual side effects with their patients, because patients aren't going to volunteer that information. And yes, SSRIs come with that risk of having sexual dysfunction, but that doesn't necessarily mean, one, that you're going to get that side effect. According to Harvard, there are 6 steps to help you with sex and SSRIs. Would you like to hear them?
I would.
Fire away.
All right. Step 1, lower the dose. Step 2, you can take breaks from your drugs under doctor's supervision. Specifically, under a doctor's supervision.
Don't just stop taking your drugs.
That's bad. Don't do that.
If you want to come off your drugs, you have to talk to your doctor about how to safely do that.
But they were offering ideas like you could stop taking your SSRI on weekends and like have sex over the weekends and then start taking your drug, everything during the week.
See, like, for me personally, I know the 1 or 2 times that I've missed a dose, it really, it really turned me into a real Mr. Hyde. So it wouldn't necessarily be doable for everyone, but
Yeah.
Right.
I think it depends on what you're taking it for, how it affects you, and
yeah, definitely.
and the drug itself.
And talk to your fucking doctor.
Rule number 1, the number 1 takeaway from this whole video is going to be talk to your doctor.
Like, how many, like, I'm sure Grade fancies himself a fucking comedian, but, like, how many stand-up routines have there been about, like, logging on WebMD and thinking that your balls are gonna fall off because, like, your fingers itch because you got, like, fucking misinformation from a random thread or, like, an article that's not even dated anymore?
Right?
Oh my goodness.
So the next step is scheduling sex because drugs have different effectiveness levels throughout the day. So like if you do what I do, which is take everything at night, you're good to go during the day.
Because you sleep off.
Because you sleep off a lot of the main stuff overnight. So, or if you take it during the day and it just staves off at night, you can fuck at night. Like, who cares? Like, who cares?
Schedule your med taking time to, be convenient with when you do everything else.
Right. And then, or you can add a drug to counteract the sexual dysfunction. Those drugs exist to help with libido.
Shit. Yeah,
Like, not just Viagra, but
Right.
like in general.
There's a whole bunch of them.
I'm
Yeah.
sure there's, like, interactions that you'd have to be worried about, but that's the same for literally any medication. Like,
Cialis.
Yeah,
I apparently shouldn't be taking, like, too many pain meds within a short
Same.
amount of time with mine. Like,
Same.
it's some kind of, like, blood thinning property involved with it, but be aware, do your research. Like,
Talk to your doctor.
if I can, like, if I can take a bit of a left turn, like, there's a lot of naysaying involved with what we're talking about. Like, a lot of people who will, like, question whether or not you're doing the right thing by taking a specific drug, which, all right, if you're skeptical, you have every right to be skeptical. But what I find really annoying and harmful to the broader picture is, like, the discouragement. And I think that was also a factor that triggered this video response, is that it comes off, joking or not, as a discouragement of taking this route.
Yeah.
Like, for some people, this could have been, like, the straw that broke the camel's back if they were even considering doing drugs of any kind. And even when you're taking the drugs, don't pussy out, like, week 3 of taking them when they don't start working right away.
Right.
There's a build-up period.
There
Yeah.
is. So it takes about 4 weeks for these drugs to build up in your system to a therapeutic level. So when people think, like, Grade even put it, like, I wanted them to cure my depression.
Well, he didn't even say he wanted it to cure. He said it's supposed to cure
your
Yeah.
depression, and that's not how drugs work.
That's not how they work.
Not at
It's
all.
they help you and they help regulate your brain chemistry, and then you have to work with, like, cognitive behavioral therapy to help fix your brain patterns, because your brain likes to get stuck in cyclical thinking. I think people classifying these drugs as a cure doesn't make sense. They're not antibiotics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
And mental illness is not like a virus or a bacteria or anything.
it doesn't go away. Like,
No.
my bipolar is never going to go away.
That's something that I really wanted to harp on, is that a lot of people don't have a choice of if they can take medication or not to just, like, function like a normal person. So to say that, to accept that, and to also accept that some people can go their whole life without taking medication of any kind, obviously there would be, like, a whole spectrum of possibility between those two things. Like, the human brain is so complex. Like, I don't know any of the fucking words you said at the beginning of the podcast. I'm not a biology major, but like it's really weird to me that they'll take people's word for it if it's a science that has to do with construction or physics or like not astronomy.
There you go.
I was about to say astrology. But we take whole schools of thought at their word because we just assume they've put in the research and the work to understand their particular field. But for some reason, we get really fucking possessive of our own brain. It's like, oh no, because that's me. I got this.
People really want there to be a black and white answer to everything.
Correct.
And there is no black and white in brain chemistry.
Like how many like units of literally anything could one measure in a brain?
Right.
So many.
It's what allows you to listen to this right now. It's what allows you to blink and taste the food that you're eating. It's what allows you to operate a vehicle. It's what allows you to remember grandma.
What allows you to process the words that we're making
Exactly.
that should be just nonsense, but somehow they're words and everybody understands
This shit
them.
is, I'll appeal to the fucking try-hard poets out there. This shit is bananas. There is a galaxy of possibility in your skull right now, and you're gonna say that you might know better than a fucking neurologist or people who dedicate their lives to understanding what drugs to put into your body to help your brain function more? Rant over. Go back to what you were saying.
Did we finish our list of of options?
No, the other option was to see a therapist.
See a therapist.
Because sex can be related to depression, so...
Yeah. So where is it coming from, the meds or the depression?
The other thing that I did a lot more research into, because it was it was more interesting, but also it's the scarier of the two, depending on who you are. If you find erectile dysfunction scarier than suicidal thoughts, I'm not here to help you.
I am, no. No. As the only man with a peen in this room. No.
Thanks for specifying.
You're welcome.
So, suicidal thoughts. So there have been a lot of conflicting studies between antidepressants and suicidal ideation, because it's really hard to decide, like, is the suicidal ideation from the depression or is it from the drugs? That's a really, really hard thing for people to decide. So there's been a lot of conflicting things, and the FDA did a very, very large comprehensive study on people across all age ranges about suicidal ideation on medication. And one thing they found was that there was no real change in suicidal ideation and drug use, like the SSRI use. But the biggest problem they found, and this is what Grade was reading, there's a black box label on all SSRIs and other antidepressants that say suicidal ideation is possible because it's actually seen in adolescents up to the age of 25.
Between the ages of 20 to 25 is when your brain chemistry is really changing a lot.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of weird things that go on with your brain chemistry when you're in the middle of like puberty and all that. So like until it evens out when you get into your mid 20s, like who knows what's going to happen in there.
And they found that the risk goes down the older you get, to the point where it becomes even protective in elderly patients.
Oh,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it actually becomes a net positive in the elderly. So there's a heavy monitoring program to make sure, and the goal is to decide with your doctor what works best for you. And one of the things with side effects that I always say to everyone in my life who has ever had to go through this is you have to be your own advocate. You have to advocate for your health. No one is going to do it for you, especially if you're an adult, which is what makes me so angry at Grade, because he is an adult. He has to advocate for himself. And yes, he decided he doesn't want meds. That's fine. I'm not here to say he has to take them. That's not my intention or anything. It's his body. He can do what he wants. And I feel that way for everybody. If you really, really strongly do not want to take medication and you're not a danger to yourself or other people, then fine. Okay, that's fine. I don't care about that. what I care about is that if you are somebody who is deciding whether or not to take medication or go that route, you just need to know the facts. And that's what makes me so mad. And you have to be your own advocate. And if you are feeling side effects that are unbearable, like Wobbles, you talk about headaches. If these headaches were unbearable, you could go to your doctor and say, hey, my medicine isn't working for me because I'm having these unbearable headaches. Obviously, you've said to me they're not unbearable, so...
I have not said on this stream yet.
Right, but you've said to me in the past.
Yeah, and like that, I'm lucky that that's the only one I get. And really, it was like the first 2 weeks or something where...
A lot of them are hella temporary.
Yeah, it was like the first couple of weeks was when they were at their worst. And even then, like, I was like, whatever, I have a headache for like a minute. And then it was fine. And now, like, I barely even notice them, which... I'm like, oh, I don't care. That's fine.
like if I had a choice, I don't have a choice, which is part of what makes, I shouldn't be as big of a pro medication advocate as I am with what goes on in my body and what I have to deal with. But if I had a choice to be able to change my medication around even more than it already has been as I've gotten older, because as you get older, your body changes, you develop tolerance to your meds, and you end up having to change your cocktail, especially in bipolar people. And I've had to change my cocktail around. And if I could choose not to be on some of the meds that I'm on, I would, but I can't. And that's what makes me so angry at people who can, because you can change. You can pick a new SSRI for your depression. You can talk to your doctor and do that. I can't change my medicine around, where for other people it doesn't seem to be as dangerous of a game, even though it's not recommended that you do it on your own.
Oh, and one of the things with coming off meds, I did come off of my medication for a little bit, which, they, even if you don't go into like crazy withdrawal, which you were unlucky enough to have to do. The problem that I had with coming off of my medication for a little bit was something called brain zaps, where you get like these little electric shocks almost in your brain.
Ew.
It's a very weird sensation. It doesn't necessarily hurt, or at least for me, it didn't really hurt.
It just catches you off guard.
It's very weird, it's very off-putting, and it's not like any sort of sensation that, and I've never felt it before.
Right.
So like, I was like, what the heck is this? And my doctor was like, those are fine, it's totally normal, they'll go away, either when you start taking your medication again or within like, however many weeks. But it wasn't a major problem.
When was the last time you even had to deal with that?
Since I started taking my medication again, not at all.
Okay.
So, like, luckily, if I ever have to go off my medication again, that's what I can expect. But luckily, it's not that big a deal, and it's not something that, like, the doctor has to be super involved with.
Right.
But I'm lucky in that that's all that happens. I could be taking something a lot more serious. I only take the generic version of Lexapro, which is a fairly mild SSRI. It's not one of the heavy ones, and I only take I take a fairly low dose. So I don't have anything that's like super crazy. I'm not Franny over there who's on everything that's gonna like murder me the second I try to like not take one.
So Grade was talking about the suicidal ideation. Well, it was only 4% of people had suicidal ideation in the giant FDA study.
Oh wow.
So that's 4% too many. Let's be honest, that's 4% too many. But
it's not as.
But it's not like it's
big a problem.
You take these drugs, you get suicidal thoughts. Like, it doesn't work that way.
Well, none of the side effects are like that.
And most of this had to do with the off-label use of giving these drugs to kids.
Yeah.
That's where most of it came from, with a slight increase in people up to age 25, no change in 25 to 30, and a decrease in older patients. And then there's some conflicting things that I've read online between what NIH had to say versus Harvard. And Harvard said that the people who attempted or completed suicides were not more likely to have taken SSRIs except sertraline. Sorry, bub.
Rip.
But they were actually more likely to be taking venlafaxine, which is Effexor, or the older tricyclic antidepressants, which, as I said, they try not to use. The NIH one said it was more likely in SSRIs, and they kind of use that as an umbrella term, but that's kind of conflicting things, but still the percentages weren't high enough to be like, it's not like 20%, you know? It's concerning, but it's not overly concerning. But because the FDA has to work with an abundance of caution, if any side effect is remotely possible, it must be reported. That's just how it works.
Because drug safety.
Yeah. And now Grade isn't from the United States, so I can't speak to his country, but specifically in the US, that's just how it worked. I do experience a lot of side effects because I'm on a relatively high dose of the atypical antipsychotic and a relatively high dose of the mood stabilizer.
And they each have their own side effects.
And they all overlap. It's not like you're guaranteed to get side effects by taking them. And my friend, who isn't in the room, who also had to start taking an antidepressant, her doctor told her she would experience side effects at the beginning, and then as her body got used to the medicine, they would go away, and she's totally fine. And they help her out quite a bit. She's much less miserable. She's much more productive. She actually gets out of bed in the morning. So it's like the net good outweighs the negative.
I'm supposed to be doing devil's advocate stuff, and I guess the first thing that I would ask you is, suppose I hear a story that's the counterpoint to what you just said. Like, suppose I was on any amount of drugs between 1 and 5 or maybe even 10 years, and I actually was miserable throughout most of it, and then once I stopped taking it, my life just got that much better. Like, what would you say to that?
I would ask why you waited so long to tell your doctor that you were miserable.
I'm with Wobbles on that. Or you can do what one of our friends did, which is drugs didn't work for him, so he went to therapy and now he's doing much better. So just because they didn't work for you anecdotally doesn't mean that they're not going to work for someone else.
Yeah.
Like, I was on Prozac and I lost my absolute fucking mind. Lost my mind. That would be irresponsible of me to say Prozac doesn't work. You know, when it helps so many people. So I don't understand the black and white absolution mindset because there's no way for anyone to know, like, what works for one person is going to work for someone else. You know, all of our genetics and our body chemistry are different. We're all unique individuals.
Which is why we all have different problems to begin with.
Right. Yeah. So if you have this issue, it's not a black and white issue. What other devil's advocates you got for me?
The one that's been a real pain in my ass. Why are we reeing so hard at a 4.5-minute comedy video that talks about PP no work? Like, it's funny, right?
I would say that, I don't know if I would count that as comedy.
Well, comedy is subjective.
It is subjective.
That much I'll give. Like,
but I have not heard one person laugh yet. So,
well, for the 3 tryhards who are sitting cross-legged, crisscross applesauce in a living room.
Hey, I am not cross-legged.
Okay,
excuse you.
Well, shut up for a second. What I'm getting at is there might be a good chunk of fucking people who disagree and latched on to whatever it was Grade was saying and thought that it was
he presented it in a way that seemed like he meant there to be an element of humor, but what he was saying was so unfunny that even though it was presented in that way that looked like it was meant to be humorous, there wasn't really a joke or a punchline. It was just
so there's
before any of y'all jump down our throats for being against Grade for not being funny, Rainie and I actually used to be like pretty rock solid fans of Grade.
I loved Grade.
I'm familiar with his shtick. I got his pacing down. Hell, I even edited on a Right Opinion video about him and tried my best to like emulate his style while contributing my own branded nonsense to it. And I can appreciate the kinds of videos he's made in the past. What really fucking bugs me about videos like this, and you know, to extend it a little bit further, some of his more political videos, which he has made, where he makes like pretty concrete stances against certain political figures or even just like the rising tide of SJWs and shit, this guy has points that he wants to make. So just because he'll occasionally make some rando joke about like cock and balls, that doesn't mean he doesn't have his own like individualized agenda he's trying to convey with this video.
Well, I think the difference between that and this video is that those videos seem like they have research and thought put behind them, whereas this one was just, I read something here and I got scared, and this is why I don't want to take this medication because these two things really scared me.
I agree 100%.
And he didn't seem like he did any kind of research. He didn't seem like he talked to his doctor about anything. It's unclear whether he was even prescribed anything.
Yeah.
Or whether he just read something on a label somewhere or looked it up for 5 seconds.
He saw that black box warning that the FDA, even though he's not in America, but the FDA, at least in America, has a black box warning forcibly on every single antidepressant. And guess what? Stuff like that exists for every drug ever. Side effects exist for everything.
And those, I'm sorry, those black box warnings are kind of like, I mean, you go on an airplane and they have freaking directions on how to eat the peanuts. Like, because people are stupid. You have to put warnings like that on everything because otherwise somebody's going to be like, this happened to me and you didn't tell me it was going to happen. Well, you know, you gotta put the friggin' directions on how to eat peanuts on these, like, drugs. Otherwise people are going to get upset when something happens that they don't like.
This cashew broke my tooth. No, like...
Oh, you're supposed to open the bag before you put them in your mouth?
We're at... Obviously, it's going to be shorter because you're going to edit it, but we are at minute 47 of, like, raw material of this podcast. The video we're reacting to is under 5 minutes. I can confirm that this guy has talked about video games, weird things that girlfriends say, the presidential election of 2016, in their own fucking videos that would most of the time be like upwards of 4 minutes, like multitudes of 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And this really complex, nuanced issue that obviously has affected him. I don't want to like give him too much shit just for like putting his thoughts and his experience of depression out there. Hell, he's done that before in videos that were also way longer than 4 minutes, highlighting how fucked it is that he had like weight gain or didn't want to do the things that like impassioned him anymore. He's done that before. I give him due credit for that. This shit was 4 minutes long and condensed 40 plus minutes of raw shit that we're trying to get at into, yeah, no thanks. I like my dick getting hard. I like not wanting to kill myself. You can't do that, dude.
That's because Franny, I didn't do any research because I'm lazy.
Because you and I are fucking idiots who ain't got time for that shit.
Franny actually researched everything.
I spent 2 days researching this.
Yeah. she like
You
actually
heard us,
read
bro.
into things.
So,
This is what happens when you do your research, is you make a long video because there's a lot to put in there.
and there's a lot of nuance, and it's just, I find him, like, look, I don't want to discount what Grade's going through.
Sure.
He has depression. Sure. Is it self-diagnosed? Maybe.
knows?
Who knows? Because he didn't specify. Because he made a 4-minute video about a topic that requires nuance.
And half of that video was, I don't want my dick to not work.
Right. So I don't want to discount his depression and his story. Because I think everyone's experience is valuable and we all deserve to be heard. It's just when you have a platform of millions and that's what you decide, literal millions, that's what you decide is your hill to die on. And anyone who says that this could have been comedy, okay, I get gallows humor. I understand gallows humor. I make gallows humor jokes all the time.
That's like half of your sense
That's
of
half
humor.
my humor.
How many times have we said we've wanted to kill ourselves in the last, like, 2 months?
Right?
But we do it within the privacy of our own dang abodes, and we do it with people who, like...
Understand that.
They'll either understand it, or if we do mean it slightly more than usual, they'll pick up on that shit and be like, yo, you need a hug? You want to go do something? Like, they're there for us.
Do you need bub time?
Yeah, do you need time with your bub?
So it's just I'm just so sick and tired of the stigmatization of this conversation, and that we all could just, accept that some people need a little bit of chemical help.
You're allowed to take whatever measures are at your disposal within reason,
right?
To be happier.
So I think the best way to go about it is to go to therapy first, and then go to a psychiatrist after, when you and your therapist kind of come to the conclusion about what's going on. I think that's probably the best way to do it, because I went the wrong way. I went to the drug people first. And that's how
And their job is to prescribe drugs.
Right. And while they tried to help me, and I don't discount that they did their best, I was given the wrong medication for a very long time. And I almost had a psychotic break because I was on the wrong medication for the long time.
And it's hard to understand why.
When you don't know anything and you're 14.
And you don't have anybody to talk to because you're not going to a therapist.
Yeah, like I really can't imagine doing anything but the cognitive therapy first. Yeah, but that's what I did as well, so.
And that's just my opinion. Now,
see, I had a different kind of experience. So I'm going to talk about me for a second.
Yes! Yes, queen. Come in. Tell us.
Okay. So a lot of my biggest issue is really anxiety. I have, there's something in mental illness called comorbidity, where you can have multiple things at the same time. And I have anxiety and depression. So the anxiety is the biggest thing, and it kind of feeds into the depression. It's a whole thing. So my anxiety, one of the big problems that I have is people. My anxiety is socially based. It's social anxiety. And I tried therapy, like multiple times. I tried therapy. And it didn't work because I was so afraid to talk to somebody because I have this social anxiety.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
That I was not willing to open up entirely, which kind of spiraled into bigger problems and caused a whole lot of trouble until eventually I ended up in a hospitalized situation where I was prescribed something, which was this Lexapro. Luckily, this was the first thing they tried for me, and it actually worked, which was it's not unusual, but it's not typical.
It's
normally.
A relief.
It's a big relief when the first thing they try is the thing that actually works. So I started with that, and it worked, but it took a couple weeks to kick in. So I still had a lot of anxiety symptoms. And then I started with actually trying therapy after that, which, there was a whole to-do because, you got to find somebody who takes your insurance and, blah, blah, blah. That was an adventure. But getting into therapy with the medication that lowered my anxiety to a level where I could manage it, then made it a whole lot easier to actually talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could actually get somewhere with the rest of my symptoms.
I hadn't considered that. If I can chime in for just a second, one of the biggest obstacles that I see in a lot of people is forming that initial trust with the therapist.
Yes.
And I guess I kind of took for granted the fact that when I started therapy, it took me 1 or 2 sessions before I was comfortable enough to talk about the shit that needed to be talked about.
Yeah.
A lot of people have trust issues. Or,
I have so many trust issues.
Right. So I guess in that regard, it does make sense that once you're zen enough from whatever drug you hopefully find that works for you, that would be a wall down that will allow you to do that other step first.
Yeah, which was the drugs were the way to open the door to be able to get into therapy, which then helped with the rest of it. But yeah, I've always been that guy who doesn't want to talk to people. I'll sit there and observe you for months before I actually talk to you. I don't let people in.
Yeah.
So forming a relationship with a therapist to a point where I could actually talk to them was such a feat that I couldn't do on my own. I had to have the medication to help me.
Thank you, Wobs.
Thank you, Wobs.
You're welcome.
See, this is why I always still preach be your own advocate, because especially in America with the way our system is, if your therapist or psychiatrist isn't working for you, go to a different one.
You have that option.
You have the freedom of choice there. And
I tried like, what was it? I tried like 4, 5, 6 maybe different therapists when I first came out and was looking for people.
Yeah, I've had 3 psychiatrists and I've had 2 therapists. There's a lot to say there about you need to find your fit and people who are willing to help you and find what works for you and work with your doctor. And you can even start by working with your general practitioner.
They can refer you to people.
Yeah, there are referrals. Some of them, if they're like a family medicine doctor, can actually prescribe you antidepressants and act as a mental health physician. So at least in America, that's how that works. So you can do that. I know I'm going to shout out another YouTube channel who doesn't need any views from me because he gets millions. But Dr. Mike actually has a lot of really cool mental health videos on his channel, and he's an actual physician. So I would just...
He has a degree in everything.
I know, he's a real doctor.
He's a real being.
So if you want to listen to somebody who's an actual doctor talk about this stuff, I recommend checking out his stuff because he's really good. But for the end of our podcast here, I want to read to you what the Mayo Clinic, because bitch be bringing out the hard facts up in here.
Yeah, that's great and all. I just don't understand why an institution based around mayonnaise has to do with anything mental health related. All right, continue.
That's always bothered me, too.
My last dumb joke.
It's my least favorite condiment.
So the Mayo Clinic has a Finding the Right Antidepressant section talking about antidepressants, and I thought it was a good way to wrap this up. So each person reacts differently to a particular antidepressant and may be more likely to have certain side effects. Because of this, one antidepressant may work better for you than another. When choosing an antidepressant, your doctor takes into account your symptoms, any health problems you have, other medications you take, and what has worked for you in the past. Inherited traits play a role in how antidepressants affect you. In some cases, where available results of special blood tests may offer clues to how your body may respond to a particular antidepressant. However, other variables can affect your response to medication. It may take several weeks or longer before an antidepressant is fully effective and for the initial side effects to ease up. Your doctor may recommend some dose adjustments or different antidepressants, but with your patients, you and your doctor can find a medication that works well for you. And I think that kind of sums up the crux of what we've been trying to say here for an hour. Thank you for listening. This has been Frantically Speaking. Thank you, Wobbles and Lanooski, for joining me. And as always, go talk to your doctor.